The storm came without mercy. The wind screamed through the small town, tearing shingles from roofs and hurling branches across the streets like forgotten toys. When the morning came and the rain finally rested, Daniel stood in front of what had once been his pride and livelihood, his workshop. The walls had collapsed inward, as though they had surrendered. Sawdust mixed with mud. Pieces of wood he had carefully carved were broken, lying scattered like the remains of a life's work undone in a single night. Daniel's hands trembled as he picked up a fragment of oak, a half-finished chair leg he had been shaping for a client. He turned it over in his palm, his eyes heavy. It wasn't just wood anymore. It was a reminder of all that had been lost. For 20 years, this small workshop had been his anchor. Now it stood broken, and with it, so did he. That day he could not bring himself to return home. He sat on a pile of fallen boards, staring at the wreckage as neighbors passed by, offering looks of pity that only deepened his shame. Each look whispered what he already feared, that he had failed. He thought of his wife and children waiting for him, and the words he would have to say. How could he admit that he was powerless, that everything he had built was gone? As the sun began to dip, casting the ruins in an orange glow, Daniel finally forced himself to walk home. The quiet inside his house was unbearable. His children tried to speak to him, but he could only nod. His wife touched his shoulder gently, but even her warmth couldn't reach him. That night, lying awake in the darkness, he felt hollow. His mind played cruel games, asking him over and over if this was the end. The next morning, Daniel wandered the streets aimlessly. He ended up near the yard of his elderly neighbor, Mr. Ellis. There, in the center, stood a great oak tree, its trunk bent slightly to one side, as if it had once bowed to a mighty wind but had chosen not to fall. Daniel stared at it, uneasy, feeling an odd pull in his chest. Mr. Ellis came out with a cane, noticed Daniel's gaze, and gave a small smile. That smile held no pity, no judgment, just a quiet knowing. For the first time since the storm, Daniel felt something stir inside him, though he could not yet name it. Mr. Ellis invited Daniel to sit on the worn wooden bench beneath the old oak tree. The morning was calm, the air still holding the damp scent of the storm, and Daniel lowered himself onto the bench, as though the weight on his shoulders had doubled overnight. Mr. Ellis leaned on his cane, looking up at the tree with a softness that only years of familiarity could bring. "That tree has seen more storms than you can count," he said, his voice low and steady. "Lightning, wind, floods. You'd think it would have snapped long ago." Daniel followed his gaze. The oak stood tall, but its trunk curved like a bow drawn back in silence. The branches stretched wide, leaves trembling in the breeze. Though scarred, though bent, it was alive, thriving. Even Daniel felt a strange unease as he studied it. It was as if the tree was holding a mirror to him, reflecting his brokenness, but refusing to break in return. Mr. Ellis continued, his words patient and deliberate. "You see that bend? It came from a storm back in my youth. Half the neighborhood thought the tree would topple, but it didn't. It bent with the wind, gave itself just enough to survive. And here it is, still standing." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to believe in those words, but the ruins of his workshop rose before him like ghosts. He shook his head. But when everything is gone, when you've poured your life into something and it's ripped away, how do you stand again? The old man looked at him carefully, as if weighing the heaviness in his voice. Then he placed a wrinkled hand against the oak's trunk. "You don't stand the same way you did before. You stand differently, stronger. The tree will never be straight again, but it's not weakness. It's proof it survived." Those words sank deep into Daniel's heart. He sat in silence, the breeze brushing against his skin like a quiet comfort. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Daniel could hear birds settling back into the branches, singing as though nothing had changed, as though storms were only brief interruptions in a much larger song. For the first time since the storm, Daniel's thoughts softened. He still felt pain, still carried fear, but there was also a small spark of something he thought he had lost hope. As he left Mr. Ellis's yard that day, he looked back at the tree once more. Its bent trunk no longer seemed like a flaw. Instead, it looked like a story etched into wood, a silent testimony to endurance. And deep inside, Daniel wondered if maybe he, too, could learn to bend without breaking. The days that followed carried both weight and quiet revelation. Daniel found himself returning often to the old oak tree. Sometimes Mr. Ellis was there, sometimes not, but the tree itself became a companion. he would stand beneath its branches and imagine the countless storms it had endured. The scars on its bark, the bend in its trunk, none of it diminished its strength. In fact, they seemed to add to its story. One afternoon, Daniel brought a small box of tools to the ruins of his workshop. His hands shook at first as he sorted through broken planks and rusted nails. Each piece of debris felt like a reminder of failure, yet he forced himself to stay. He remembered Mr. Ellis's words, that standing again does not mean standing the same. With that thought, he began clearing the wreckage, one board at a time. Neighbors noticed his effort. A few offered to help, bringing hammers, nails, and spare wood. At first, Daniel resisted, ashamed of being seen so vulnerable. But then he remembered how the oak tree thrived, not in isolation, but surrounded by the life it sheltered. Slowly, he allowed others in. His children brought him water and stayed by his side, their laughter breaking the silence. His wife's smile grew warmer each evening as she saw him working, even if the progress was slow. The new workshop was not grand. It was smaller, simpler, built from salvaged wood and donated materials. Yet, as Daniel placed each piece, he realized it held something his old one never had: the memory of being rebuilt through resilience, patience, and love. The walls no longer stood only for his work, they stood as proof that he, too, had bent but not broken. When the final nail was driven, Daniel stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. The building was modest, but in his heart, it stood taller than the one he had lost. He walked over to Mr. Ellis's yard, where the oak swayed gently in the breeze. The old man nodded knowingly, as if no words were needed. Daniel laid his hand against the oak's trunk, feeling the rough texture of its bark. The bend was still there, visible and unhidden, yet it carried no shame. It was a mark of survival, and in that moment, Daniel understood. His life too would always bear the bend of storms endured. But like the tree, he would stand, rooted deeply, unbroken. As the sun set behind him, painting the sky with golden light, Daniel felt a calm he hadn't known in months. The storm had taken much, but it had also given him something far greater: the strength to keep bending and never break. Life bends us in ways we do not choose. Loss, failure, and hardship press down like storms that seem too heavy to survive. Yet within us lies the quiet resilience of the oak tree, the power to bend, to yield without surrendering, to carry scars without losing strength. Daniel's story reminds us that survival is not about standing perfectly straight, but about standing at all. May we each find the courage to bend when needed, and the faith to believe we will not break. If this story touched you, please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more reflections.